Have you ever asked someone a question and then realized you already asked it? Maybe your spouse answers you. You continue the conversation and a few minutes later, you ask the exact same thing again. Or perhaps someone says, "You already asked me that." And suddenly, you feel embarrassed. You may even start wondering, is something wrong with my memory? If this has been happening to you after 50, don't panic. Repeating a question does not automatically mean dementia or a serious memory disorder. Sometimes it happens because your brain never fully registered the information in the first place. And understanding why that happens can help you recognize the difference between an ordinary memory slip and a pattern worth discussing with a healthcare professional. So today, we're going to look at why you may keep repeating the same questions after 50, what your brain may actually be doing, and which warning signs you should never ignore. First, it's not always a memory problem. Here's something important. Memory doesn't begin when you try to remember something. It begins when your brain pays attention to it. Imagine someone tells you, your appointment is Thursday at 10, but at the same moment, you're thinking about a bill, watching television, checking your phone, or worrying about something that happened earlier. You may hear the words, but your brain may not properly encode them. Later, you genuinely don't remember being told. So you ask, what time is my appointment? This can feel like a memory problem, but sometimes the information simply wasn't stored clearly enough in the first place. And this becomes particularly important as we get older because attention can be affected by stress, poor sleep, fatigue, medications, hearing difficulties, and an overloaded mind. In other words, sometimes you're not forgetting the answer. You never fully took it in. Reason number 2, your brain is overloaded. Think about how many things your brain manages during a normal day. Appointments, passwords, bills, messages, shopping lists, family responsibilities, work, household decisions, health concerns, and dozens of tiny choices that you make without even noticing. Your brain has limited attention. When too many things compete for that attention, information becomes easier to miss. This can create a frustrating experience. You ask your spouse, "What time are we leaving?" They say, "At 6. You nod, then your phone rings. You check a message. Someone asks you another question. You start thinking about dinner, and 10 minutes later, you ask, "What time are we leaving?" It may look like your memory suddenly failed, but the bigger issue may have been mental overload. And if you have been feeling mentally exhausted lately, repeated questions may happen more often. Reason number 3, poor sleep. Sleep isn't just about feeling rested. Your brain uses sleep to support many important processes, including learning and memory. After a night of poor sleep, you may notice that you're more distracted. You may lose your train of thought. You may struggle to find the right word. And you may have trouble remembering conversations. Now imagine several nights of poor quality sleep. Your brain may be functioning under a constant cloud of fatigue. This doesn't automatically mean something is seriously wrong. But persistent sleep problems shouldn't simply be ignored. If you're regularly sleeping poorly, waking frequently, or feeling exhausted during the day, it's worth discussing the problem with your healthcare professional, because sometimes improving sleep can make a noticeable difference in how clearly you think during the day. Reason number 4, stress changes how you think. Have you ever noticed that when you're extremely worried about something, you can read the same sentence 3 times without absorbing it? Stress can consume attention. When your mind is focused on a problem, there may be less mental space available for ordinary information. You might be talking to someone while secretly thinking, "Did I pay that bill? What if that appointment goes badly? How am I going to handle tomorrow?" Your ears hear the conversation, but your attention isn't completely there. Later, you can't remember what was said. So you ask again, This is one reason repeated questions can become more noticeable during stressful periods. And here's an important distinction. Occasional repetition during stress is very different from steadily worsening memory problems that interfere with everyday life. Reason number 5. You're multitasking. Many people believe they're good at multitasking, but your brain often isn't truly processing several demanding things simultaneously. Instead, it may be rapidly switching attention from one thing to another, and every switch creates an opportunity for information to be lost. Think about this situation. You're preparing breakfast. Your phone is ringing. Someone is talking to you. The television is playing in the background. You're trying to remember what you need from the grocery store. Then someone tells you an appointment time. You say, okay. But 5 minutes later, you ask, when is the appointment? Your brain wasn't necessarily incapable of remembering. It was simply trying to process too many things at once. One surprisingly simple strategy is to stop and give important information your full attention. Look at the person speaking. Repeat the information out loud. Write it down. Put it into your phone. These small habits can reduce the amount of information your brain has to hold at once. But here's where you should pay attention. Not every repeated question is harmless. The important thing isn't simply whether you repeat yourself. It's the pattern surrounding it. For example, occasionally asking the same question because you were distracted, tired, or stressed is different from repeatedly asking the same question because you cannot remember the answer even after someone has explained it several times. There's another difference. A person experiencing an ordinary memory slip may realize, oh right, you already told me that. They may remember the conversation when someone gives them a clue. But a more concerning pattern can involve repeatedly asking the same question without remembering that the conversation happened at all, especially if this behavior is becoming more frequent. That's when it's important not to diagnose yourself, but also not to simply dismiss it as aging. Watch for changes in everyday life. Memory concerns become more important when they begin affecting familiar activities. For example, you frequently miss appointments even though you normally use a calendar. You repeatedly forget important conversations. You have increasing difficulty managing bills or medications. You become confused about familiar places. You struggle to follow a recipe you've prepared many times. You frequently lose track of what you're doing, or family members notice changes that you don't recognize yourself. One isolated incident doesn't tell you what is happening, but a persistent pattern that is getting worse deserves attention. And there are many possible explanations for changes in memory and thinking. Some can be related to sleep, stress, depression, medications, hearing problems, nutritional issues, or other medical conditions. That's why it's better to get a proper evaluation than to assume the worst. There's also something many people forget: hearing. This one is easy to overlook. Sometimes what looks like memory loss is actually a hearing problem. If you don't clearly hear what someone says, your brain can't accurately remember information it never received properly. You might say, "What did you say?" Then later ask the same question again. If people around you frequently tell you that you're not listening, or you often ask people to repeat themselves, consider where the hearing could be contributing to the problem. A hearing evaluation may be worth discussing with your healthcare professional. What can you do starting today? First, slow down. When someone gives you important information, stop what you're doing for a moment. Look at them, listen, then repeat the information. For example, "So we're leaving at 6, right?" That simple repetition gives your brain another opportunity to encode the information. Second, use external reminders. There is absolutely nothing wrong with using a calendar, notebook, a phone reminder, or written list. In fact, these tools reduce the amount of information your brain has to hold in working memory. Focus on one conversation at a time. Fourth, protect your sleep. A consistent sleep schedule, a comfortable sleep environment, and addressing persistent sleep problems can all be important parts of supporting healthy cognitive function. And finally, don't be afraid to talk to your doctor if you're concerned. You don't need to wait until a memory problem becomes severe. You can simply say, "I've noticed that I've been repeating questions more often, and I'm wondering if we should look into it." That gives your healthcare professional a starting point. One more thing you should remember. Getting older does not mean you are destined to lose your memory. Yes, some changes in memory and processing speed can occur with normal aging. You may take longer to recall a name. You may occasionally walk into a room and forget why you went there. You may need more time to learn something new. But aging should not become an excuse to ignore significant or progressive changes. Your goal isn't to become afraid of every forgotten word. Your goal is to notice patterns. Ask yourself, is this occasional? Is it happening more often? Does stress or poor sleep make it worse? Am I still able to manage my normal responsibilities? Have other people noticed a change? And most importantly, is the pattern staying the same? Or is it gradually getting worse? Those questions can tell you much more than one forgotten conversation ever could. So, the next time you catch yourself asking the same question twice, don't immediately think, "Something is wrong with my brain." Think about what was happening when you first heard the answer. Were you distracted? Were you exhausted? Were you stressed? Were you doing 3 other things at the same time? Or has this become a persistent pattern that is affecting your everyday life? That distinction matters, because sometimes your brain isn't forgetting. Sometimes it simply wasn't given the chance to remember. And if you've noticed that you keep repeating the same questions after 50, you're not alone. The important thing is to pay attention not with fear, but with awareness. Your brain deserves that kind of attention. And if the changes are persistent, worsening, or interfering with daily life, talk with a healthcare professional rather than trying to diagnose yourself. Because understanding what's happening is always more useful than simply worrying about it. If this video helped you understand your memory a little better, subscribe to the channel. Here, we explore the everyday changes in memory, focus, energy, and brain health that become especially important after 50 without turning every normal mental slip into something to fear. And remember, a forgotten answer isn't always a failing memory. Sometimes, your
What time
brain
is Sarah
simply
coming over
wasn't
today?
fully listening when the answer arrived.